The city skyline was a testament to ambition, a forest of glass and steel where fortunes were made and lost in the time it took for an elevator to reach the penthouse. At the very top of the tallest of these titans, the Sterling Global Logistics Tower, Richard Sterling surveyed his kingdom. His suit was Italian, his watch was Swiss, and his smile was a carefully calibrated instrument of power. Below him, the city was a complex network of arteries, pulsing with the trucks and ships and planes that were the lifeblood of his $10 billion empire. He saw patterns, profits, and power. What he didn't see, what he never saw, was the man cleaning the panoramic window he was looking through. That man was Samuel Jones. To the world of Sterling Global, Samuel was a ghost in a gray jumpsuit. He was the gentle whir of a floor buffer in an empty corridor at midnight, the faint scent of lemon polish in the boardroom before dawn, the silent presence that emptied wastebaskets filled with discarded million-dollar ideas. He was 62 years old, with hands that were calloused from a lifetime of labor, but his eyes held a quiet, steady light that missed nothing. His movements were economical and graceful, a dance of practiced efficiency. He didn't just clean, he restored order. He saw the building not as a structure of concrete and wires, but as a living organism, and he was one of its quiet caretakers. He noticed the faint flicker in the light on the 42nd floor, the subtle buckle in the carpet near the accounting department, the way the air pressure changed just before a storm rolled in. He saw the patterns that everyone else was too busy to notice. Richard Sterling's pattern was one of brisk, self-important strides. He moved through the halls like a shark, all forward momentum, his entourage of junior executives trailing like pilot fish. He rarely made eye contact with anyone below a certain pay grade. To him, people like Samuel were part of the building's infrastructure, no different from the plumbing or the HVAC system necessary, but utterly invisible. The problem began on a Tuesday. It started not with a bang, but with a flicker of red on 1,000 screens. The company had just invested over $50 million in a new, state-of-the-art logistics software called Odyssey. It was meant to be Sterling's magnum opus, an AI-driven system that would revolutionize supply chain management, optimizing shipping routes with predictive analytics to save the company hundreds of millions a year. It was supposed to be flawless. Instead, it was a catastrophe. The first reports trickled in like a leaky faucet. A shipment of medical supplies meant for a hospital in Denver was somehow rerouted to a warehouse in Dubai. A fleet of trucks carrying perishable goods was sent on a circular route through the Arizona desert, their refrigeration units burning fuel for no reason. Within 24 hours, the trickle had become a flood. The system was hemorrhaging money. The red numbers on the crisis room monitors climbed with nauseating speed. 1 million, 3 million. By Friday, the loss was approaching the $10 million mark, and the bleeding wouldn't stop. The atmosphere in the tower turned toxic. The air, usually crisp with conditioned confidence, grew thick with the stench of fear and stale coffee. The Odyssey development team, a group of wonderkinds in their late 20s with degrees from MIT and Stanford, were hollow-eyed and frantic. They camped out in the main conference room, which became a chaotic war room of whiteboards covered in incomprehensible code, empty energy drink cans, and the palpable hum of desperation. Sterling was a caged lion. He prowled the 50th floor, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down the spines of his vice presidents. "I paid a king's ransom for the best minds in the world," he'd roared in a meeting, "and they've built me a $10 million bonfire. Fix it. I don't care how. Just fix it." One evening, as the sky outside bled from orange to deep indigo, Samuel Jones was doing his rounds. He pushed his cart of supplies into the war room, the gentle squeak of its wheels, a stark contrast to the frantic clicking of keyboards. The young engineers, hunched over their laptops, didn't even look up. They were drowning in data, lost in a digital storm of their own creation. Samuel began his work, his movements silent and methodical. He emptied the overflowing trash cans, carefully separating the paper for recycling. As he did, his eyes scanned the discarded printouts, the crumpled sheets filled with algorithms and flowcharts. To most, it was gibberish. To Samuel, it was a language. Before he was a janitor, long ago, he had been a different man. A man who taught advanced mathematics at a community college. A man who saw beauty in prime numbers and elegance in a perfectly balanced equation. Life, in its cruel and unpredictable way, had rerouted his own path, but the passion had never died. It had just gone quiet. He noticed something on a discarded diagram, a small, hastily scrawled recursive loop that seemed out of place. It was a feedback loop that, under certain conditions, would begin to feed on itself, compounding errors exponentially. It was a simple, almost elegant mistake, the kind a genius might make when trying to be too clever. It was like a tiny crack in the foundation of a skyscraper, invisible to the eye, but destined to bring the whole thing down. He paused, holding the crumpled paper in his hand. He looked over at the lead engineer, a young man named Ben, whose face was pale and slick with sweat. Samuel felt a pang of sympathy for him. He knew the feeling of being trapped by a problem that defied you at every turn. Hesitantly, Samuel walked over. "Excuse me, son," he said, his voice soft and raspy. Ben looked up, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He saw the gray jumpsuit, the cart, the wrinkled black face, and his expression shifted from exhaustion to annoyance. "What is it?" "I'm busy." Samuel held out the crumpled paper. "This part of the code here," he began, pointing with a weathered finger. "The query that's supposed to optimize for fuel cost. I think it might be creating a paradox when it cross-references with cargo weight. It's sending the system into a loop. It's not a bug in the code itself, it's a flaw in the logic." Ben stared at him, first in confusion, then in utter disbelief. He snatched the paper, glanced at it, and then let out a short, harsh laugh. "A flaw in the logic? What do you know about logic?" Just then, the glass doors to the conference room slid open. Richard Sterling strode in, his face a thundercloud. "What's the status?" he boomed. Ben, flustered and eager to deflect, gestured dismissively toward Samuel. "Nothing, sir. Just a distraction." Sterling's cold eyes fell on Samuel for the first time that day. He took in the janitorial uniform, the cart, the crumpled paper in Samuel's hand. A slow, contemptuous smirk spread across his lips. It was the end of a long, humiliating day, and here was the perfect target for his frustration. "Mr. Jones, isn't it?" Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension. The entire room went silent. The engineers turned in their chairs. "What are you doing offering your expertise?" Samuel stood his ground, his dignity a silent shield. "Sir, I just noticed a pattern in the discarded." Sterling cut him off with a wave of his hand. He stepped closer, invading Samuel's personal space, making sure everyone could hear. "A pattern? How fascinating." He turned to the room, a cruel ringmaster playing to his audience. "Gentlemen, seems we've been looking in the wrong place for a solution. We've had a mathematical prodigy in our midst all along." Hiding behind a broom, a few of the junior executives snickered nervously. Ben looked at the floor, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. Sterling leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper meant only for Samuel, but loud enough for those nearby to catch. "Stick to your mops, Mr. Jones. We pay people 6 figures to think. We pay you to clean up after them. Now get out of this room." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as shards of glass. Humiliation, hot and swift, washed over Samuel. He felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. He saw not just dismissal in Sterling's face, but a deep-seated disdain, a belief that a man like him, a black man in a janitor's uniform, was incapable of thought, let alone brilliance. He slowly lowered his hand, the crumpled paper falling from his fingers. Without another word, he turned, his back straight, and pushed his cart out of the room. The gentle squeak of its wheels echoed in the dead silence he left behind. As the door slid shut, he heard Sterling's voice again, back to its booming arrogance. "Now, where were we? I want a solution by morning, or there will be pink slips for Christmas." That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. The insult wasn't just an insult, it was a denial of his very being. It erased the man he had been and invalidated the man he was. He lay in his small, neat apartment, the city lights a distant, mocking twinkle. But then, Another feeling began to surface, pushing through the hurt. It was the stubborn, persistent pull of the problem itself. The flawed logic, the elegant error it called to him. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved, and Samuel Jones had never been able to resist a puzzle. He got out of bed, dressed not in his gray jumpsuit, but in a simple shirt and slacks, and took the late-night bus back to the Sterling Tower. He let himself in with his master key, the building now a silent, sleeping giant. He didn't go to the war room. He went to a place no one ever used anymore. A small, forgotten classroom on the 3rd floor, once used for training seminars. And on the wall was a massive, old-fashioned chalkboard. Under the dim glow of a single light fixture, Samuel Jones picked up a piece of chalk. The feel of it in his hand was familiar, a comfort from a past life. He didn't need a computer. The entire problem was already mapped out in his head. He began to write. He didn't write code. He wrote mathematics. He drew flowcharts, not with a mouse, but with the full sweep of his arm. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the chalk against the slate was the only sound in the cavernous building. He wasn't just solving a software issue. He was conducting a symphony of logic. He diagrammed the flow of data as a river, and he showed where the Odyssey algorithm had built a dam in the wrong place, forcing the water to churn back on itself, creating a whirlpool that was pulling the entire company under. He mapped out not just the problem, but the solution, a simple, counterintuitive change in the primary query sequence. Instead of prioritizing cost first, you had to prioritize logistics and then calculate cost. It was a complete reversal of the system's core philosophy, but on the chalkboard, in the pure, unassailable language of numbers, it worked. For hours, he worked, losing all track of time. The sun began to stain the eastern sky, casting long shadows across the empty city streets. Samuel stood back, his shirt dusted with chalk, and looked at his creation. The chalkboard was a masterpiece of logical clarity. It was the answer. It was the truth. Meanwhile, 50 floors up, the war room was a scene of utter defeat. The sun was rising, and they had nothing. The losses had now surpassed $12 million. Sterling, who had slept for 2 hours on his office couch, stormed in, his face haggard. "Report." Ben, looking like a ghost, just shook his head. "We've tried everything, sir. Every diagnostic, every patch. It's like the system has a mind of its own. We can't find the source of the corruption." Sterling looked at the terrified faces of his team. His company, his legacy, was crumbling before his eyes. The board was calling for an emergency meeting. At a.m., his career was on the line. Desperation gnawed at him. It was then that a young intern, a quiet woman named Maria who often stayed late and had seen Samuel's quiet dignity up close, spoke up. She had been on the 3rd floor fetching old binders and had glanced into the training room. She had seen the chalkboard. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly, there's something you should see." Annoyed, but with nothing left to lose, Sterling followed her, with Ben and the other senior engineers trailing behind. They took the elevator down to the 3rd floor, a part of the building Sterling hadn't visited in years. Maria led them to the old classroom. She pushed open the door. The room was filled with the soft morning light. And there, covering the entire expanse of the massive chalkboard, was the solution. It was an intricate, beautiful, and devastatingly clear map of their failure and their salvation. The men who had spent days staring at flickering screens, lost in a labyrinth of code, now stood frozen, staring at an elegant, hand-drawn proof written in chalk. Samuel was there, sitting quietly in a chair in the corner, a thermos of tea in his hands, waiting. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. Ben was the first to move. He walked toward the board as if in a trance. He traced the lines with his finger, his mouth slightly agape. His programmer's mind translated the mathematical notations into code, the flowcharts into system commands. He saw the flawed loop, the paradox, and the breathtakingly simple solution. "My God," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "He's right. He's completely right. This is it. This is why it wasn't showing up in the diagnostics. We were looking for a broken line of code, but the code was perfect. The question we were asking the code to solve was wrong. The other engineers crowded around, their initial skepticism melting into stunned comprehension. Murmurs of "incredible" and "it's so simple" and "how did we not see this" filled the room. They looked from the chalkboard to the old, black janitor sitting in the corner, and for the first time, they saw him. They really saw him. Richard Sterling stood at the back of the room, utterly paralyzed. His mind reeled, struggling to process the scene. The janitor, the man he had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed as being less than human, had just saved his company. The chalkboard was a silent, thundering indictment of his own arrogance, his own blindness. Every elegant line, every perfectly placed number, was a testament to the genius he had been too proud and too prejudiced to see. The humiliation he felt now dwarfed what he had inflicted on Samuel. This wasn't public shame. This was a complete collapse of his self-perception. He wasn't the master of the universe. He was just a fool in an expensive suit. Samuel finally stood up and looked directly at Sterling. There was no triumph in his eyes. No "I told you so." There was only a quiet, unshakable dignity. "The system thinks like an accountant," Samuel said, his voice filling the quiet room. "It's trying to save $1 on every trip. But it's doing it 1,000,000 times a second, creating so many branching possibilities that it gets lost. You have to teach it to think like a driver. Get the package to the destination first, the most efficient way. Then, worry about the cost. The savings will follow the logic, not the other way around." The board meeting was the most surreal of Richard Sterling's life. He didn't stand at the head of the table. He stood at the side, humbled. At the front of the room, Ben and his team, with Samuel Jones standing quietly beside them, presented the solution. They didn't use a PowerPoint. They showed pictures of the chalkboard. They gave full, unequivocal credit to Samuel, explaining not just his solution, but the depth of his insight. The board members, a group of ruthless, bottom-line capitalists, were silent. They looked at Sterling, then at Samuel. They weren't just looking at a $10 million problem being solved. They were looking at a fundamental failure of leadership. The fix was implemented. Within an hour, the network of red on the monitors across the company flickered and turned to a steady, beautiful green. The system, now guided by a new, wiser logic, began untangling the mess it had made. Shipments were rerouted correctly. Trucks moved with purpose. The bleeding stopped. The Odyssey software, corrected by the wisdom of a man who earned minimum wage, began to work flawlessly, even better than projected. Later that day, Samuel was called to the 50th floor. He entered Sterling's office, not as a janitor, but as an invited guest. The vast office, with its panoramic view of the city, seemed different now. Sterling was standing by the window, the same window Samuel had cleaned just days before. He looked older, smaller. He turned to face Samuel. There was no smirk, no arrogance. His eyes were clear of the toxic pride that had blinded him. "Mr. Jones," Sterling began, his voice quiet, heavy with the weight of his own folly. "I've been trying to find the words to apologize, but I'm sorry feels like trying to patch a canyon with a Band-Aid." He walked over to his desk and leaned against it. "When I looked at you, I didn't see a man. I saw a uniform. I saw a function. I saw what I wanted to see. I was wrong. Not just wrong about the problem, but wrong about everything." He finally met Samuel's gaze. "What you wrote on that chalkboard wasn't just a solution. It was a lesson, and I was the student who needed it most." Samuel simply nodded, allowing the man his moment of reckoning. "This company," Sterling continued, "is built on finding the most efficient way to get things from point A to point B. But I forgot that the most valuable asset we have isn't software or trucks. It's people. And I almost threw our most valuable asset out of the room because I couldn't see past the clothes he was wearing." He gestured to a chair. "The board and I have talked. We've created a new position, head of the new strategic analysis and problem resolution department. It's your department. You'll answer to no one but the board itself. You will have a team. You will have a budget. Your job will be to look at our entire system and find the other cracks, the other flaws in logic were too blind to see. He slid a folder across the desk. "This is the offer. It's commensurate with the value you've just provided the company." Samuel looked at the folder, but didn't open it. He looked at Richard Sterling, a man stripped bare of his arrogance, and saw a glimmer of something new: humility. Redemption wasn't about punishment. It was about change. "I accept," Samuel said. Quietly, the next morning, Samuel Jones walked into the Sterling Tower. He was wearing a simple, well-tailored suit. He walked past the janitorial closet without a glance. He took the elevator straight to the 50th floor. As he stepped out, the executives and assistants in the hallway stopped and stared. They saw him. Richard Sterling came out of his office to greet him, extending a hand, not as a king to a subject, but as a colleague. As they shook hands, the morning sun streamed through the panoramic window, illuminating them both. The janitor was gone. In his place stood the man who had always been there, a quiet giant whose true worth was never defined by his job title, but by the brilliant, orderly mind that saw the patterns in the chaos. True value is not found in a title on a door, the price of a suit, or the assumptions we make in a single glance. It resides in the unseen corners of the world, in the quiet minds and calloused hands of those we are taught to overlook. Genius doesn't have a dress code, and wisdom doesn't require a corner office. The story of Samuel Jones is a reminder that the most profound power often lies dormant, waiting not for permission, but for a problem worthy of its attention. It teaches us that to truly see the world, we must first learn to see the people in it, all of them, for the limitless potential they hold. If you believe in the power of truth to humble privilege and the strength of character to overcome prejudice, subscribe for more stories that uncover the hero hiding in plain sight.